Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. It's a joy to be here with you.
Welcome, everyone, wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Zaya Benazzo.
My name is Maurizio Benazzo. We are speaking to you from the ancestral unceded territory of Cosmic Walk and South Pomo, currently known as Sebastopol in California.
People.
Thank you.
Welcome and thank you. We're really delighted for our conversation today with Dr. Leroy Little Bear. What an honor. Welcome. Let's see if we can have you on screen with us. Yes. Thank you so much. Such an honor to be in conversation with you. And we usually read bios, but we don't feel that's appropriate. And we would ask you if you would introduce yourself the way you do, and if also maybe in your language, if that feels appropriate to you.
Ja, okay. Nistuan nakok ikaskiniwa. Inaksiks kainaw ksauki tapiwa and then uktu tsitapi. I was introducing myself in our Blackfoot tradition. And that is, my Blackfoot name is Lowhorn. It's named after the buffalo on the plains. And I'm of the Small Robes clan. I belong to Gana, our tribe, and we are of the Blackfoot Confederacy. So that's where I come from, and that's what makes who I am.
Thank you. And just for our audience, we'll be closing the chat during this first part of our conversation, and then we will open and you can send your questions in the Q&A box, and we will read them when it's time for questions from you. So please try to formulate them clearly so it makes it easier for us to communicate your questions. Thank you. Leroy, maybe we can begin with in the Western thought, the self is seen often as separate, as an individual. Identity is somehow fixed, is personal, and it's internal. How would you say a self and identity is understood in the Blackfoot worldview and ways of being?
Oh, very good question. In order for people to understand, let me go over some basic foundational basis that we use, that is, different cultures use for identity and for ways of thinking. Okay. Now, in the Western world, everything is about matter. Everything is about matter. Knock on wood. In other words, anything you can see, touch, smell, and so on. We limit ourselves to our five senses. Okay. And also, the thing is, the world as we see it is stagnant. It doesn't change and so on. We might talk about evolution, entropy, and so on. But the best example is Einstein and his phrase, his bumper sticker that says, God does not play dice with the universe. In other words, this is the way he made it. This is the way it'll be forever and a day. Okay. Now, another point of Western way of knowing is, hey, we may talk about, we may start out from a very broad perspective, but eventually we use a funnel and we come down to the point. And which means then this is it. Okay, this is it. And consequently, we're very, we always look at that final deal, that final point. And this has lots of implications because it then comes down to there's only one way of looking at the world. There's only one right answer. There's only one true God, and so on. See, you can think about school, all the kids, the students, and so on. You have to come up with the right answer. In other words, we've come to the point. Okay. And as a result of that, we come with the notion that, hey, if we're talking about a point, we look at everything from a singularity perspective. It's singular, and, there's no, it's kind of like there's no other way, and so on, to look at it. It's singular. And things are not related. We don't talk in terms of relationships, say. And of course, a human invention, the notion of time comes into the picture. Everything is about time. It runs our lives. In other words, that clock runs our lives. And this particular conversation, hey, it's going to start at 10 o'clock Pacific time. See, that's an example. And so those foundational bases of thought come up with what I call an interpretive template that we walk around with. The notion of interpretive template, a quantum physicist, Steven Weinberg, talks about an interpretive template. And so that interpretive template then is what we walk around, and we filter everything through that interpretive template. See? And so that results also in social values. The social values. Now, social values play basically two basic roles. One of them is their standards that we use for judgment and so on. And they also play the role of goals that we should strive for. See, so in Western thought, very quickly, but just as an example, bigger is a social value. Faster is a social value, and so on. See, more, etc. And our whole economic systems are a good example. They run on that basis, bigger, faster, more, and so on. Now, if you can keep those in mind, let me shift over to the Blackfoot ways, so on. The Blackfoot approach is it's not about matter. Everything is about an energy force, energy forces, and there's lots of them out there, energy waves. So you can picture yourself as your ordinary kitchen radio, okay? And the energy waves are out there, and the radio is just filtering them out, filtering them, and so on. And if it doesn't filter them correctly, hey, all you hear is static, say. And so it just filters them and so on. So it's not the radio that has the info within itself. It's the energy waves, it's the radio waves out there. So, in other words, you can begin to see yourself. If you're all about energy, you as a human are just filtering energy waves that are already out there. Yeah.
Wow.
So they're not. So in our Blackfoot ways, we say it's the energy waves. Our elders speak about it as the spirit. So when they're talking about spirit, they're really talking about those energy waves. So in the Blackfoot way, hey, we're about energy waves. Okay. And because those energy waves are all about motion, they're not still. They're forever changing, transforming, deforming, reforming, and so on. Hey, we, are just filtering those, okay? And we might talking about knock on wood. Well, what ends up being matter and so on? Hey, those are just descriptions of combinations of energy waves. They could change anytime. See? And when you start thinking about that, you start to see, hey, you've got to have a great big spectrum of things as opposed to down to the singular point. Okay. And consequently, everything becomes interrelated. So in the Blackfoot world, everything is about relationships. Okay. And since everything is in motion, everything is animate. So those rocks, those trees, those plants, and so on, everything is animate. Whereas in the Western world, only you and I are animate. There might be those birds out there, but we don't take them into consideration. Only you and I are animate. See? So, but in the Blackfoot world, everything is animate. Rocks, trees, the sky, the clouds, and so on. Everything in the environment. So when our elders talk about relationships, they're talking about all my relations, which means all those other spirits, all those other energy waves out there. So that's who are all my relations. We're not talking about human biological notions about relationships. See?
Mm.
And land, the land, the place is very important. The land is going to change, just like in that flux of change. Hey, the land is going to change, but it does not change as fast as other things. So, at least for the time being, I can hang my hat on it and use it as a reference, just like time is used as a reference. See? And in both cases, the language that develops for each society complements those interpretive templates. So I walk around with a Blackfoot interpretive template. Whatever comes to me, that's what goes and is filtered through that. In a Western way, hey, a very different interpretive template. So, and if we use science as an example, in the Western world, if it's not measurable, if you can't measure it, it's not scientific. You can't measure love. You can't measure relationships, and so on. So those are not about science. In the Blackfoot world, if it's not about relationships, it's not scientific. Yeah.
That's
So
amazing.
it's not, everything is about relationships. So if it's not about relationships, it's not scientific. In the Western world, if you can't measure it, it's not scientific. See, big difference in energy waves and thought ways of thinking. But that's the interpretive template that Blackfoot people, other indigenous people walk around with. Whereas in the Western world, I'm looking at everything through that interpretive template. See? And what we've been telling scientists especially is that, hey, I'm sitting in front of my window over here looking out. Well, it don't matter how I lean over and look through that window. Eventually, that window will only allow me to see a certain amount of what's out there. Okay. And I tell people, especially the scientists, let's enlarge the window by adding the Blackfoot window to it so that you'll see a bigger spectrum of the reality out there. See? Now, coming back to the notion of reality, and your original question is, see, people like Weinberg, Steven Weinberg says, there is an objective reality out there. But as soon as you put a human being in the picture, that interpretive template comes into play. So you use your interpretive template to try and interpret the real objective reality out there. So every morning when you wake up, you think you're waking up to the reality.
Right.
When in truth, you're waking up to the interpretation of the reality, the human interpretation, and more specifically, the cultural interpretation. See? So when I wake up to a Blackfoot interpretation. And that's because of those interpretive templates. See? So when we're talking about who we are, you can begin to see where my identity arises from. So I say, I'm part of this Blackfoot traditional territory. That's where my reality arises from. And consequently, that's where my being, my identity arises from. See, Western world, depending on where you are, well, to a very large extent, the Western world has colonized and spread itself over the globe, but they don't really have that identity of place. So time becomes the reference point. See?
Wow.
Wow.
So if I would say, so in the Western world, the self is fixated, it's private, it's separate, and it's time based. We have to run, we have to hurry, and we live right now. Our world, Western world, is very much in anxiety, in depression. The what we call mental illness is skyrocketing. I'm curious, from Blackfoot worldview, when the self is in flux, is energy, is relational, what does well-being means? And it's connected to the land. And what does healing means, to heal oneself?
Right. See, let me use England as an example. Okay. If anybody can tell us the story about the real first and indigenous people of that island that we refer to as England, I don't think there's very many that can tell you that. Why? Well, because, like we said, their interpretive template has scattered us all over and so on. Okay. And so the whole notion then is, hey, it's kind of like cultural borrowing. Hey, I'll borrow a little bit from Roman. I'll borrow a little bit from the Celts, the Anglos, the Saxons, and so on. See? And so it starts to become a real mixture and so on. But people are really longing for that place, that notion that we can use as identity. And consequently, a large part of the way we do things, especially running by the clock, hey, takes us out of that sphere. And that's where the mental notions, mental illnesses, and so on. In other words, because we're running with the clock, everything is about speed, faster. Well, we all become very tense. And the notion of stress really is the basic cause. Because if we're stressed out all the time, well, our immune systems and things like that get depleted. And consequently, the illnesses, including mental illnesses, come to the forefront. In the Blackfoot world, hey, we didn't run by the clock. Okay. And when we do refer to the notion of time, if we can put it that way, is, hey, we use large environmental phases, continuing phases, like the moons, the stars, and so on. Those are very large phases. And when we talk about time, let's say on a day-to-day basis, we talk about, we could say antok, meaning now, apinakwasi, meaning tomorrow, mistapapinakwasi, day after tomorrow. And we stop there. Not because we can't count beyond two. We do the same thing backwards. Matuni, mistaputuni. We stop there. Anything beyond the 2 days is, becomes amalgamated into the Western notion of past, present, and future. See, it's all, in other words, even somebody like Stephen Hawking says it just is. See, in other words, it just is. And so that's we don't run by the clock. Okay. We let things happen and so on. And we adjust to all my relations. In other words, any changes and so on that will occur, we do the adjusting. We adjust and fit ourselves into it. So that whole notion of just is not well understood in the Western world. But what has happened with the notion of mental illness and so on is because we were colonized, and that colonization process is still going. The story I tell is the Spaniards came to North America. Okay, I mean, not to North America, to the Central and South America with Columbus. Okay, well, they had been around for over 100 years when people like De Soto came up from Mexico into what is now North America, turned eastward over to the Mississippi, and on back down to Florida. He brought with him something like 500 or 600 men and 300 or so head of pigs, swine, for food and so on. He talked about towns that we would call cities today. Up and down the Mississippi River, he said there were towns of 60 to 70,000 in each town. Okay, this was in his notes. Well, the thing is, they we've heard about swine flu? Okay. Okay. Well, the thing was, Europeans have always been herdsmen. They herd their domesticated animals. And so they become more immune to diseases that are transferable between humans and animals. The Plains Indians, as an example, hey, we never domesticated our animals. We let them be, and we chased them only when we needed them. So we go out hunting and so on. So the health profiles of Europeans is they're more immune to infectious diseases such as TB, smallpox, and flu, and so on. The Plains Indians were more immune to parasitic type of diseases. So they didn't, but not infectious diseases. So when the infectious diseases hit us, you can use COVID as an example. Hey, it just ran wild. From estimates of people in the Americas prior to Columbus was 125 million people. More people than all of Europe at the time. Well, 100 years after DeSoto came up towards Florida, it was 1600, 1604, when what is known as Jamestown was the first permanent settlement by the British. They knew about North America. They came back and forth, but never settled it like the Spanish did in Central and South America. And so the diseases just, pandemics. And so when the British came, they thought the land was empty because there were so few people. So think about 125 million in the Americas to almost nothing. See, that's the vulnerability we had at the time of colonization. So our whole thing was being colonized, and it's from that stress that arises from colonization that we've gotten all these diseases and we go through mental stresses today. And those mental stresses, people try to, do it themselves, DIY, do it yourselves. But a lot of them end up doing it the wrong way and get involved in drugs, alcohol, and so on. So colonization really caused dysfunction. And so that's what you hear on your films, like when an owl calls my name, hey, the elders are trying to guide their people back to what it used to be. See, it's a long, slow process, but it is happening. But to a very large extent, that's where the illnesses, the mental illnesses arise from that. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. Disconnection.
Yeah.
relationships that are broken, relationships with the land. The Europeans came with a broken relationship to the land
Right.
they came from. I want to bring again what you started with, the language and the templates, right? The language represents the templates that we use to interpret reality. So a lot of indigenous languages, and you can speak to the Blackfoot language, are English language is noun based, right? It's object based, and that informs how we see the world, how we relate to each other, to the land. Indigenous languages are more, you can tell us how indigenous languages represent the relationship to reality that
Yeah.
indigenous people experience. And maybe for you, the conflict, if you experience the conflict in walking in these two different worlds and two
Mhm.
different templates of interpreting.
Yeah. Very interesting question. And language, like I said, develops to complement the interpretive templates. Okay. Now, in Euro languages like English, we all speak English and so on, and a lot of the world speaks English and so forth. Let me just throw out examples of the difference and so on. Number one, of course, English is a very noun-based language. It's all about names. English is very good for categorizations, counting, etc. Okay. And the thing is, let me just throw out an example. Okay. The example is you in the ordinary English sentence, a very simple sentence, it's A is, and underline is B. A is B. Okay. That's the ordinary English sentence. When you stop and if you stood back and say, if A is B, why do you need B?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. Okay. So, in other words, one of the things that arises out of that is in the English language, because of the noun based notion, we always need the other. We always need the other. Okay. Now, in Blackfoot, there's no such a thing. It, I'm it. I'm it. That's why our elders can say, I am the buffalo. And the buffalo is me.
Wow.
See, we're all energy forces. You're just manifesting in a different combination of energy forces. I am the land. See, in English, we can't do that. So now, in English, it's you can go down the list, good, bad, saint, sinner, talking about duality, saint, sinner, dark, light, etc. Those are what we use within our interpretive template. So in Blackfoot, hey, there's no distinction. Not that we can't make distinctions. We can make the distinctions, but to a very large extent, It's all about all my relations. See, now let me give you one of my favorite stories and so on. Me and a friend of mine, uh, Woody Morrison, talking to a Haida elder. The notion, it's a long story, but the notion of dynamics without motion. Think of that. Dynamics without motion. And he just took just a little bit of thought. And he said, oh, that's easy to answer. He said, consider yourself out on the ocean because they're from the coast in your canoe, and you're far enough away from the land where you can't see the land anymore, and not you can't use the land as a reference anymore. In other words, you're just out in the middle of the water, the ocean. And he says, you know, your canoe is moving because you're rowing it, okay? But 360 degrees around you, you're always the same distance from the horizon. He says that's dynamics without motion. See, now in English, that's not possible. So in other words, that interpretive template does not include that. See, in the indigenous world, we do that. I'll give you another example. In English, of course, especially when I'm tired and a little bit sleepy, I can say, I'm going to go lay down. Okay, I'm going to go lay down, meaning I want to take a little bit of a nap, a little bit of a rest. Okay. Now, in Blackfoot, we say, Daxis tokists. Daxis tokists. What that if a Blackfoot speaker were asked, interpret that to English, they'd probably say, I'll lay down. But the deep meaning of Daxis tokists says, and the best English translation for it is, I'm going to make myself thin. May sound a little bit funny when you say, I'm going to make myself thin. But think about it, if you're coming at the notion from an energy wave perspective, so that if I'm standing up, all those energy waves are hitting me and going through me, causing my tiredness, and so, but if I make myself thin, less of them hit me. Yeah, not as many of them are going through me if I make myself thin. Very different. Say, very different way of looking at. And that's based on the language. My wife, Amethyst, her favorite example is in English, we could say a dog. Well, in English, because it's a name, a dog is a dog is a dog is a dog. Okay. In Blackfoot, we say imitao. Okay. Imitao is not about a dog as in English. It's a being of some kind that's on the move. We never say what it is. And the reason we don't say what it is because those energy forces can change. In other words, the transformation can occur at any time.
Mm.
Yeah. So we never talk about a finality. All we do is describe what we're doing, what we see happening. That's what we're describing. So that's why a large part of someone is just description.
Mm. Mm.
It's just description about what's happening. In Western thought, we always want to come with the finality. This is the way it is. Yeah.
Mm.
So
It comes to mind a beautiful quote from the poet Rumi, who said, "You are the universe in a static motion."
yeah,
It's like it could be a saying also from Blackfoot perspective.
right.
What what drew you to David Bohm's work and quantum physics? And do you see more parallels between Blackfoot worldview and the direction and quantum
Yeah,
physics is pointing to reality?
yeah, yeah. David Bohm was a very interesting person, and we
And you got to meet him.
had good conversations with him. Um, the thing is, in quantum physics, the uh, the parallel between indigenous thought, like Blackfoot thought, and quantum physics is in the area of motion. In the area of motion, and they do talk about energy waves, but a large part of that notion is overridden by the tendency towards nouns. So the quantum physicists talk about particles, subatomic particles and so on, when in reality, those subatomic particles really are energy waves. See, but they can't get away because the language won't allow them to get away from the notion of a particle and coming to the notion of a point. See, whereas if you looked at it from an energy wave perspective, hey, no problem. We end up having an overlap. And consequently, why David Bohm was even concerned about trying to change the English language more to a motion language. So he realized that. And consequently, I was teasing him, telling him, hey, you won't need all your math that goes with your science if you spoke Blackfoot.
That's true.
Why? Why? Well, let me give you an example, and you can find these in literature. Get a person by uh, a linguist studying Navajo, a Dene language, for the simple phrase, English phrase, to go, okay, to go. In Navajo, you can conjugate to go 352,000 different ways. Okay. You can, yeah.
Wow.
Now, the thing is, I know Blackfoot to be similar, you can, and so on, but there's 352,000 different ways. Now, the thing is, that's the reason why the English language is not a good science language. We have to adopt a different language like mathematics to describe what's going on. Whereas in Blackfoot or Navajo or Haida and so on, you don't need the math. Your language can describe all those aspects that quantum physicists are talking about. See, in our, when we're talking from an energy wave perspective, hey, our elders can speak about that.
Wow. I'm curious, when we met many different indigenous communities, let's say on an island, on one side of the island, the language is so different from the language on the other side. And we
Right.
asked them, why is that so? Do you know? And one group would say, well, our language came from the ocean, where the other side, they would say our language came from the mountain. So
Yeah.
wonder if the English language you pointed, it's kind of a mixture of
Wow.
things that don't necessarily come directly from the
relationship.
relationship and the land.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
why is it so
Disconnected.
not to fixate it again with an explanation,
Yeah.
but
The way we explain that is that however a particular society comes into existence. There's lots of different theories about the origin of a particular society that might become a nation, a country, and so on. But however that society comes into existence, sooner or later, that society claims a territory. Say, and when they claim that territory, it's within that territory that all their relationships arise from. Say, and so for Blackfoot, we're plains. We're plains people. So whatever we see on the land and all that, the stars we see, people from New Zealand, when they look up, they see a different set of stars. See, we see a different set of stars. So our stories come from those stars, etc., and so on. It comes from all the land, from the sounds of the land, whether it's the wind, the animals, and so forth. See, that's how language develops and so on. So that claiming of territory is the reason why languages and cultures are different, because hey, that's what we relate to, see, and that's where things arise from, see. And so, one side of the island, as you put it, will see different things. The other side will see different things. So you can begin to imagine at a global level how things might be. But it's the claiming of territory, and within that territory is where the culture, the language arises with the relationship of what I refer to as the environmental totality. The environmental totality. And so Plains environmental totality is where my people arise from, so on. And so that's where our language and our culture arises from.
We have a lot of questions, and I wonder, maybe one last question from us. The buffalo has been a long central teacher for Blackfoot nation and people. What would you say are the core teachings of the buffalo about life, about relationships, about resilience that we humans can learn from?
Oh, the buffalo is a keystone species at two levels. At two levels, it's a keystone species. Now, keystone means, a stone that holds everything else up. Okay. Now, the buffalo as a species is an animal that attracts all other smaller animals and so on, and even bugs, etc., and in its movements, etc. It's actually an animal that brings everything kind of together and acts as a keystone for a whole bunch of other beings, whether they're bugs, smaller mammals, and so on. It attracts them. Yeah. And in our way, we say the buffalo is our relation, and the buffalo acts as the basis and source of a large part of our songs, our stories, our ceremonies. That's why it's keystone. It's also keystone for the land itself. The buffalo is the best environmentalist you can have, because it brings about that ecological balance and so on, by bringing all these other relatives with the buffalo. See, so it's also keystone, and it's an eco-engineer. It eco-engineers the territory. See. And culturally, it's the source of our songs, our stories, ceremonies. And of course, the language comes with it. See, that's why it's very important. So the buffalo is the reason why a large number of indigenous nations now have signed on to what we call the Buffalo Treaty. But the proper name really is the Buffalo, a treaty of renewal, cooperation, and restoration. That's what the treaty really is, the real title. But we just, for short, we just talk about it as the Buffalo Treaty. And that's the beginnings of people, especially on the plains, going back to the sources before the interference through colonization, so on. So in other words, the immediate sicknesses and pandemics, now that we're kind of getting past them or starting to develop immunity to them. Hey, now let's go back to our home base. So that's why the buffalo is coming back to its its world and its true role as a keystone species for indigenous culture. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. Keystone versus domination, right? So different.
Right. Oh, very much so. Yeah.
We
We we live with it, we cooperate with it, and so on. Yeah. It's not about, as you said, domination. No. It's our relative.
and most indigenous languages don't have a word for domination, correct?
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
No. We don't have that.
There's a question connected to what you were saying before about immigration, relocation, and movement away from our own territory. Does it mean that we cannot be at peace and connected unless we reside in our own territory?
Well, what it means is talking about peace and things like that. Well, yeah, with the way our people explain it is, hey, you're in Blackfoot territory, okay, but if you're going to go into Sioux country, if you're going to go into Navajo country, you do what they do. Okay. So, in other words, we respect each other. We know we're different, but we respect each other. Why? Well, the Sioux or the Navajos know the land and all the relational networks within their territory.
Beautiful.
Okay. Now, when they come to our territory, then we expect them to respect us and do what we do up here. We don't want to go into Sioux country and say, "Hey, we're bringing Blackfoot ways into your territory." Say
Beautiful.
that would be a disturbance. So by having that respect, the relationship with other nations, in our case, other tribes, and so on. See, and that's what our world leaders need to realize. Okay, we're different, etc. But when you come to us, hey, do what we do, we'll do what you do when we go and visit you. Peace can be easily be reached by bringing that type of thinking to the world by our world leaders today. Yeah.
I just want to follow on one question on this, like for Europeans who feel disconnected from the land because of thousands of years of disconnection, what would you advise them where they can begin to listen and to walk with the land, how they can start recovering that relationship?
Well, one quantum physicist um, studied um, stories, what a lot of people refer to as myths and so on. And he found out that, hey, these myths have a lot of scientific knowledge and so on when you dig deep into them, etc. And we need to go back to those stories, see. And we can tell you stories that speak about a lot of stuff that Western science is now trying to get and so on. And you're just now starting to discover, just like, hey, illness and so on. It's it's a much bigger picture. Western doctors take the what I refer to as the auto parts approach to health. In other words, hey, there's something wrong with you, we'll replace it, and so on, just like you do with an automobile. Well, the thing is, that whole notion about interrelationships and so on is not taken. So if I fix this little change, put in a new part, everything will be okay. That's not how it works. So my advice would be go back to those old stories, so on. You will find your science, your history, and so on in those stories. No scientific formula is going to tell you that.
Beautiful. Yes. Yes, thank you.
I have two questions somehow connected and not about what is truth in Blackfoot, and do the Blackfoot have a word or concept for zero or nothing?
The thing is, when you think about the notion of counting, etc., it's, a lot of people thought it's a great discovery to have zero, just like the Mayans did think about, because they ended up in their world about the notion of tracking the planets and stars and so on. And but the thing is, the the thing is, when you look at things from this flux point of view of different energy forces, okay, you can have lots of zeros. Why? Because every new combination is a starting point. You can look at every new combination of different energy forces being a starting point. So the thing is, hey, zero, yeah, you can have lots of zeros.
Right.
Because everything is about that flux and those energy forces.
Yeah. And zero doesn't mean empty.
No, zero doesn't mean empty. Yeah. Let me give you one example, not quite on with regard to the question, but a big thing was made about the discovery of the Higgs particle. And I see over here 3 equals mc squared. Okay. E equals mc squared, I should say. And the whole notion is everything is energy force, but when does it become matter? Okay. So it takes a whole lot of energy forces to produce matter. Okay. It takes a tremendous amount of energy forces to produce matter. And the thing then is, at what stage between, in other words, at the equal sign, E equals mc squared, at what stage does it become matter? That's what the Higgs particle, and it's not even a particle, they call it Higgs field. Okay. So when you talk to elders about it, hey, it remains energy force, an energy wave. But at that point, hey, there's a transformation of the energy force. So it's really just a transformation in the energy combination of forces. So from an indigenous Blackfoot perspective, no big deal. Something we've talked about, can easily talk about, no big thing.
There, could you speak about what in the Western we call psychosis, delusion, hallucination, and how is the Blackfoot view of these experiences?
Come up with the question again. Let me really
So, what
understand.
in the Western world we call psychosis, delusion, hallucination, how do you view them in your?
Yeah. Well, see, the thing is, in the Western way of thinking, we limit ourselves to a state of awakeness.
Ah,
Only what we see in a state of awakeness is what's real to us. We don't include things such as dreams. So that, but when you stop and think about it, dreams are still are your experiences. See? And so in the Western world, we limit ourselves to a very narrow spectrum from which we draw our information for propositions. Because to a very large extent, Western science is really very propositional. It's all about proposition, see. And whereas in the native world, in the indigenous world, in the Blackfoot world, hey, we have a much broader spectrum from which we draw information. In other words, we have a wider window and that we draw information from, including dreams and, what you might think of as psychosis and, chaos in the mindset of a person, etc. So therefore, hey, dreams are part of that spectrum. And we draw our information from that wider spectrum than just from the state of awakeness.
And maybe just to follow on that, is there an objective reality in Blackfoot traditions?
Yeah. And reality, hey, there's no it to it because it's always in motion. So in other words, it's almost as one of our friends realized that, and he said, hey, he used the example of surfing out in the ocean. He said, hey, when we're thinking, we're actually surfing the flux. And when it becomes a thought, then that's when you stop surfing. Okay. So, but thinking really is a surfing of the flux.
Mm, as long as we don't get attached to the thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I.
There is a what advice would you give to a displaced indigenous person on how to remain grounded, connected with Mother Earth, and protective of his or her mind and bodies while navigating life in the West?
Yes. Well, I guess what we do is saying, let's let's just stop. I tell people the best way to think about it is to look at things from a a midlife crisis. Okay, we all know people who have gone through midlife crisis. Okay, well, one person going through a midlife crisis might say, "I've been on this job for 30 years, and I hate the damn thing." Okay, but I am. I've got a house to pay for. I've got my kids to send to school, and so on. In other words, I'm stuck in it. Say, another person might say, I'm going to sell everything and go around the world. Basically, meaning I want to do something different. Okay. Now, a third person might say, hey, when I look back on my life, etc., I I really enjoy what I'm doing and so on. I think I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. Okay. So therefore, which one of these do we want to be? In other words, hey, by looking at it from a midlife crisis, it means let's stop and let's reflect. Okay. But see, in Western notions, from a Western perspective, stopping to reflect is hard because of the clock. When you're not running by the clock, it's much easier to stop and reflect. But see, but a lot of people, yeah, I'd like to do this, I'd like to do that. But right now, I've got this to do. I've got to be at the office right now. I've got to sign this document and so on. See, in other words, that clock keeps running your life. So that's what I would advise people is let's stop and reflect. Yeah.
Right.
There is a question that I find intriguing. Is there a word for maintenance in your language? I find it intriguing. Sorry.
Is there something about maintenance? Well, let me refer what really refer to it as sustainability.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Sustainability. Okay. In the Blackfoot world and in this flux when you're surfing and so on, that flux, that really what we're doing is knowing that things are never still, things are forever changing. What we're trying to do is find regular patterns in the flux. And it's those regular patterns that we say, hey, these are the patterns that have brought us about. In other words, it brought humans into the picture. Now, what we need to do is see if we can maintain those patterns. just like we're saying about land. We know the land is going to change eventually, but at least for now, we can use it as a reference point. Say, rely on it as sustainability. Say, but if you don't sustain or start interfering with all those factors and conditions that give human existence, will go the way of Neanderthal man. Neanderthal man, we lived next to each other. But see, they didn't do their ceremonies or they didn't do the things, they interfered with the process that gave them existence. So they were a passing phase. We're to the stage as humans that, hey, we're changing this, we're changing that, and so on, because change is part of our interpretive template. Say, and we're now starting to worry about greenhouse gas effects, etc. Hey, well, it may be that we'll go the way of Neanderthal man, say, if we don't watch. So what we need to do is come back and say, what is it that really gives human existence? Say, the buffalo is a good example. The buffalo comes from that species of animals that have been around for 25 million years. Okay. They're from the bovine family. Bovines are about 25 million years. Human beings, as we see each other, we've only been around for 250,000 years. Look at the wisdom, the knowledge, and so on that the buffalo has. See, it has a whole lot more experience with life than we do. We're brand new kids on the block. See. Now, you can even go further back. The fish, scientists tell us, have been around for 450 million years. And we think we know everything? What gives the fish continuing existence? They've discovered, but we never asked them. We want to dominate them. See, we never asked them. That's what we need to go back to. It's what conditions and factors give us continuation and sustainability to our human existence. The way we're going, in my personal estimation, geez, I don't know, probably another 50,000 years. I don't know if we'll survive beyond that. So, the way we're going. So we need to make a change if we want to last longer.
Right. There's 50 questions we would not be able to cover, to begin to cover them. Maybe one last question, if you can say something. There was a question about ceremony. You know, ceremony is not just a ritual. How, and again, many of the Western world has forgotten that language, and I don't know if you refer ceremony as a language, and what's the importance of ceremony in restoring
Well,
balance or in, yeah.
yeah, it's a very good question. And that is ceremony is an attempt to maintain and to sustain those processes, those factors and conditions that give us existence. Say, ceremony is, trying to be in the same, if I can just simply put it as energy waves, brain waves, as the ones that are out there. Say, that's what ceremony is about, to kind of put us in tune with the rest of those energy waves. Say, and the thing is, if we don't do that, well, we may be taking the wrong turn, so to speak. Yeah. So that's the importance of ceremony. It's putting us in tune with the energy waves that are out there that give us existence.
Mm.
Wow, beautiful. That's it.
Well, and this is it. This is a beautiful place to complete this conversation. And I am so much wisdom, so much gratitude for your generosity of wisdom and heart. Is there any words you would like to share, maybe in Blackfoot tradition, that you say at the end of a gathering or a meeting to send us off with that, with vibration?
Yeah. Well, I guess when we speak to people and so on, we tell them, you know, we've told the story, see, and we want you to pass the story on down so that future generations will know the story and continue the tradition. See? So that's what I'm wishing everybody, that, hey, we've told some of these stories and so on, not the whole story, but at least some of it. And we would like all the people listening, so on, to carry the tradition and pass that on down to our future generations. Yeah. And I also want, knowing this is from a different tradition, hey, it's about Christmas, which is a story. Hey, yeah, I respect that. So I want to wish everybody of that tradition, Merry Christmas and a good New Year. Yeah.
Mm, so much gratitude, so much.
Wow.
Uncle, if I can call you Uncle Lee, Little Bear, thank you for sharing. And may we carry those stories and wisdom into our lives, to our communities, and pass it on. It's a medicine that this world needs. It's a remembering. We all need to remember those ways of being.
Right.
Yeah.
And thank you, everyone, for your presence, for your curiosity, with all the incredible questions that poured through the chat. So much gratitude. And may we live into receive the answers from everywhere to our questions, if we can listen.
And if you have not seen If an Owl Calls Your Name, it's available. Please watch it. It's the last movie
By
of
donation.
ours. It's by donation, including zero. If you cannot afford it, it's okay.
Share
But
it.
watch it and share it if you may.
Yeah.
So deep
Thank
gratitude.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you
Antonio.
so much, Dr. Leroy. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Gratitude.
Say hello to Sebastopol.
Yes. Ciao, Sebastopol.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Have a nice rest of the day.